God is the greatest power. We shall never be defeated. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Freedom Side Chats. We have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Jonathan Lee. We are going to talk about an event that occurred recently. You may not have seen it. We'll tell you about what that was and everything that happened, but we kind of wanted to recap what happened during that event because it was just so powerful. So many people were blessed, and we thought that you all would enjoy an extension of that conversation and hearing about what it was. So basically, we're going to recap that, and before we do that, I want to tell you about the organization that this occurred with. So me and Jonathan here are a part of a organization called GO, which is a youth arm of the Day of Pentecost Celebration Foundation in Cincinnati. And so basically what we do, we believe in the idea that the Bible talks about: go forth into all the nations, into all the world, and preach the gospel and let everyone know who Jesus is. And so that is what we're doing in every form, whether that means through community service, whether that means through preach word, through service, through just praying for people, or doing conversation events and just talking to people. Whatever it takes to get the word and the gospel out there, that is what GO is about. So go check them out on Facebook at GO Cincinnati, and also look us up, find us. If you have any questions, hit us in the comments. We'll get you more information. Great organization to get involved with. So we had a conversation. Jonathan was the basically what I am now. He was the host of that conversation. Sure. So I think if you're comfortable with kind of recapping what that conversation was.
Sure. So we recently had a conversation. It was based on our theme, our name, GO, and it was really how to go. Like, we talk a lot of times in church about, you got to get saved, you got to live right, but we never really talk about what that means. What does live right mean? What does it mean to go? When the Bible tells us, go ye therefore and teach all nations, what does it mean to go? Like, how do I actually walk that out? And so what we did was we got together a good cross-section of folks. We tried to find people of different races, different genders, different experiences to talk about how to go as a Christian, as a young Christian today. So what does that mean? So we got into conversations about politics, about abortion, about taxes, about different denominations, about race. So we really tried to go kind of deep into what it means to go. And how do you balance the responsibilities of being a Christian with the challenges of the world that we live in today?
It was a great conversation. Please go check it out. It's on GO's Facebook page. It's almost 2 hours. I think it is 2 hours.
Yeah, we try to keep it at a tight 2 hours. But it's it's worth every minute of watching.
When you're done, you'll be like, this could have gone further. They could have really dug into some of these things. Yeah. And we hope to in the future, but time was what it was. So please do that. Please share this now. Share this conversation that we're getting ready to have now, so to get it out there, because we're going to talk about some things and kind of expand on those things that we didn't get to expand on in the conversation. So this will be good for a lot of people as well, to kind of see what they might have missed and get more insight. So please share this, comment, let us know what else you want us to talk about. Let us know if you wanted to have Mr. Jonathan Lee back, or if you don't like him, we won't.
That's fine.
We won't have him back. But seriously, please share, comment, let us know how you're feeling. So, what the conversation, like Mr. Lee said, was about what it means to go, what does it mean to be in the kingdom currently as young people. So one of the first questions was, what do we mean by the kingdom? Does it mean, this is a Minister Lee word, if you don't know, is it being ecumenical, accepting, blending all interpretations of Christianity, or is there something deeper? So basically, is being a part of the kingdom mean just existing within it and being a part of that community? Like, I believe in Jesus Christ and his death, burial, and resurrection, therefore I am a part of the kingdom. Or is it more to it? What does it mean to be in the kingdom? And so from that, I think there was a diversity of answers in the conversation.
Surprisingly, yeah, there was. And I think kind of what it boiled down to between the people that were talking, as far as like the actual panel participants, and in the comments that because we had a live stream going on at the time, there was some thought as to if it's just if it's just related to a particular denomination, or if it's a lifestyle choice, if there's some sort of connective tissue in there. And I think that was kind of someone made a point in the comments that just being good isn't enough. Like, there's got to be more to it. And so it was that sort of, I think where we landed ultimately in the conversation was, it's that connection to the will of God, and that connection to doing what is going to bring about God's kingdom, or cause his will to be enacted on the earth. And it was that sort of connecting to that, I think, was where we kind of landed on it.
And I really liked how you'll see when you watch it, Sister Laquita, how I thought that she brought a great insight to what the kingdom was. She kind of said that basically it was that within a kingdom, there are many groups within the kingdom, and many different leaders and different sects within that kingdom, but not everyone, just because you're in the kingdom doesn't mean you're of and for the kingdom. And I was like, that makes so much sense. There's so many different versions of Christianity out there, so many different ways of interpreting the Bible. So there is a overarching kingdom that we all rest under in the belief in Jesus Christ. But not all of us are of and for the kingdom in the way that we believe as apostolics you should be. So I really enjoyed that, because I think it's something that as young people and Christians, something that we don't think about. Like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Like, am I just supposed to be in church, and because I believe in these things, therefore I am resting in his space? Like, I'm in God's kingdom. But what does that mean? Like, what is the depth to that? What am I supposed to be doing to make sure that I remain for and of the kingdom, and not just in it?
Right. Not just kind of here existing, just kind of going through the motions. There's a song somewhere, I'm sure it shows up in a couple songs, but where the singer says, I'm just going through the motions, as opposed to really connecting and really like, why am I doing what I'm doing? There's people who will go to church for 30 years and sit in the same pew every Sunday and swear that they are a part of the kingdom, and have never set foot into, never taken a step into what it is that God would have them to be and have them to do. And I think that's kind of it, is that acknowledgement that it's not really my will, it's not really what I want, but this is what God wants me to do in accordance to his will, to help the mission go forward. I think once the group of people who are kind of reach that realization, kind of hit that spot, are who we would say these folks are actually in the kingdom.
And so I think thinking about it deeper, like, I think both of us like history to a certain degree. When it comes to like the classical idea of what a kingdom is.
Sure.
There are people back in the way it used to be. People in the kingdom were given a role.
Right.
Like, rarely did you just get to choose that I'm going to be this. There was no that the king or the ruling class decided you were this. You are a soldier. You are a priest. You are whatever.
Right.
And it was bad back then, and we pulled away from it because it was human beings, flawed human beings making these decisions. And we clearly saw this is going to turn tyrannical, and it's not good for anybody. But now in the kingdom of God, it is God who is determining like what you are and what you should be. And so now I think if we want to dig deeper, now that we have the time about that conversation, what is the kingdom? Now we're like, okay, now that I'm in it, how do I get to that call? Like, what am I designated to do, and how do I answer that?
Right. Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of different schools of thought on this, and I'll say this with the disclaimer that people who are a lot smarter than me have struggled with this as well. So it's not, we aren't the first people to kind of cross this bridge. But I think there's one, through prayer and fasting, like, it's just spending that time with God will help you to understand, okay, this is what I'm actually supposed to be doing. because, like I say, he'll make that will known to you. Okay, this is where I want you to go. But then also, I think it's listening to the leanings of the Spirit, listening to, what is it, what is the things that move your heart. So like for me, for example, one of the things that I know I'm supposed to do is to write. And one of the reasons I know I'm supposed to write is because that's one of the things that gives me joy. That I don't have I can't tell you where it came from. I can't tell you why I enjoy it. I just know that I do. And so, and a lot of times, I've told my wife this before, a lot of times I feel the closest to God when I'm writing, when I'm doing the thing that He has called me to do. And so, like, if you leave me alone, I carry this notebook around with me. I've got a dozen more like it. But that's the thing, like, if you allow me the space, like, that's what I'll go do. And I think as believers, like, we have to, one, be willing to spend that time in prayer and fasting, but two, also listen to, like, He will show you, like, He will make it plain to you, like, this is what I want you to do. And like the other day in prayer, I was like, trying to seek God, what is I'm supposed to be doing? Like, I'm at an interesting crossroads in life, with everything that's kind of going on with me personally. And I was just asking God, like, Lord, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Like, I'm in this ministry and that ministry and have all these things. And He just told me clear as day, Jonathan, I already told you, like, you need to write. Like, that's the thing that's going to help you, one, realize your place in me, and two, get to that fullness, get to that fulfillment. So I think to answer the question, it's listening to, he's like Pastor, it's even like Pastor preached on Sunday, like, He's already giving you all those things. You just have to access them. And so it's that sort of, I got to access what's already in here. Like, I don't have to ask and beg for God to give me these things. Like, He's already given them to me. I just have to access them. I think that's what we have to do, is prayer and fasting, and then learn to access what's in there, because that God's already given you the thing that you need to do.
And so I think that it's good that you brought up Bishop's message from last Sunday. You should go watch that if you haven't. One of the high points of the message, he talked about that you can get in and still miss it because you didn't walk around. You didn't go and find and see where everything's been. You're in the kingdom, but you're not. It's not like the kingdoms of old. This is God's kingdom where you actually do have the freedom. He's told you what you're supposed to do, but then He's giving you the freedom to walk around and discover new things and discover new places and new doors that you can use that gift and that ability and that calling that He's given you. And so you have to so part of being in it is not only just saying, okay, God, I accept what you've given me and the calling that you've given me, but now I'm going to walk around the building. I'm going to walk around the kingdom and look in doors and look in different places and see, oh, this might be a good place for me to use that calling that you've given me. Because faith is nothing without works. You may have this gift, but if you just sit in the pew every Sunday and don't go anywhere, don't do anything, don't use it in any fashion, it'll be worthless.
And I think that too also speaks to kind of that broader sense of kingdom, where a lot of times we get caught up on, just being in the church, just, like, again, going back to the bishop's example, like, you go into the church and there's people who've been in church 30 years and have only ever been in the sanctuary or the pastor's office, like, but they've never been upstairs or downstairs or in the music room or anything like that. And I think what happens when we do that, we kind of box ourselves in. One, we lose some of our effectiveness, and two, we don't ever exercise the dominion that we're supposed to exercise in the way that we're supposed to. So an example of this is, like I said, the thing that God has called me to do and asked me to do is to write. And because of that, there have been opportunities for me to write in different spaces that are not necessarily church, but in writing in those spaces, they've allowed me to go and see and do other things and be in spaces where I ordinarily would not have gotten to go. If I only ever wrote the Sunday school play, for the Sunday school Christmas play, I would have never been exposed to movie making. I would never been exposed to, just briefly, like last year or earlier this year, I was involved in a project where we wrote a movie and wound up getting to go on a trip to Europe. And it's like, had I only ever written in a church, can I say that I would have gotten to do that? Maybe. but I don't know. But because I was walking in the domain, walking in the thing that God has called me to do, that now puts me in a different space where now able to expand the kingdom. Now I can show, well, this is what a little church boy from Cincinnati can do just with the strength of God, the strength of God residing within me and working throughout. And so I think that's the thing we lose sight of, because a lot of times there's a fear. Like you get in a space and it's comfortable. And so you don't want to move outside of that sanctuary or that pastor's office or that one spot. But you don't want to move outside of that. And so you get stuck in that space. And you might be the best singer in the world, or the best apple pie maker in the world, or the best whatever there might be. But if you only stay in that space, if you don't activate and don't reach the full, go explore the fullness of the kingdom that he's giving you, then you'll never really be the full that you can be. You'll never be as full as you can be, or you won't express yourself as widely as you could for the kingdom. So
yeah, absolutely. Share this conversation now. We're going to get even deeper. It's getting good already. So share this, comment, tell us what you're thinking, tell us what else you want us to hear us talk about. But share this with your friends and family and let them know that there's good conversation happening here. And so to expand on what you were saying, one thing I had thought about was, you can get scared and get mixed up on what it is that you want to do. So sometimes people, and this is a thing that I think the church struggles with when we're talking to young people, you don't want to use your gift outside of these four walls.
Yeah.
You don't want to sing anywhere else because, you're supposed to save your voice for Jesus. And that is true. But there is, for me, the only reason I knew that I could do this show was because I had done shows at UC in college. Because I had done a radio show at UC. I had helped direct and helped record and helped film shows. I had done other things and done other leadership positions and used my voice in other domains that I realized, now I can use this in the kingdom because I've learned from the world what I have access to and what I can bring back. And so it's difficult because it's not necessarily within the walls, and you are using your calling and you're not necessarily using it for God in the moment, but it does make sense if you are using it and learning about it. Just make sure you bring it back.
Right. Yeah. So there's I've grown up in a church, specifically this church, and there's a saying that I learned somewhere, and it's, they don't like you till they love you. And what happens a lot of times is, and this really gets deeper into kind of where the church is today, but a lot of times until you have external validation, you really don't get internal appreciation. And so what happens, for me, I've been writing since I was 12. I've got books published, they've gone international, all these other things, but those only happened. I didn't start writing outside of church. Initially things were, trying to write stuff that felt right for church. But it wasn't until I had a chance to go out and, like I said, get exposure to all the skill sets. There is something to learning how to do things the right way. There is an orderly system, and even without getting too deep into it, everything that we are trying to do, there is probably an outside counterpart. There are rules to video production. The Lord may call me to do it, but if I don't learn how to hold it, use a ring light or get a C-stand, or if I don't learn how to edit, it doesn't matter how much the Lord called me to it. I cannot do it in excellence. The Lord might call me to write, but if I don't know how to type or how to actually use a pen or how to construct a sentence, or what's the difference between a compound complex sentence, or what's tone, or why does this matter? If I don't know those things, then no matter how much I might feel called or led, I'm going to lose the effectiveness. And so part of being in the kingdom, part of being willing to walk in that kingdom, means I may have to go somewhere that's scary or somewhere that's different, but it allows me to learn the lesson that I need to learn. I'll give you a silly example, if you will.
Absolutely.
If you think about in The Lion King, Simba and
Talk about
Mufasa
it.
are up on the rocks, and he's looking out over his kingdom.
Yeah.
And he says, okay, he looks at everything. All this stuff over here looks beautiful. But then when they look over here, and he says, Dad, what's that shadowy place? And Mufasa says, you never go there. But what we find is when that happens, Simba learns one of the greatest lessons of his life, that his dad is there with him. Even when he gets in trouble, even when it's difficult, even when it's scary, his dad will be there. And so that's kind of what happens for us in the church, is that we see the beautiful part. Like, they tell you, oh, stay with God and it'll be wonderful and it'll be good. But there will be dark spaces that you may have to walk through. Like he says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, there will be dark spaces that you have to walk through, even in the kingdom. And it's in those spaces that we learn lessons. Like, yes, when they were sticking with the Lion King, when they were walking through the grass, and Mufasa's trying to teach them, everything the light touches, and the ants eat the grass, and all that stuff, circle life and all that stuff you're trying to teach them. Like, that's wonderful. But there's also other lessons that have to be learned. And so, I think you're fine. And I think that's kind of what happens when you have a gifting, you have a leading, that there will be spaces that you will have to walk through.
Absolutely.
And know that God is with you, even though I'm not saying you go out and go crazy. What I'm saying is, even in a church, even in the kingdom, there will be spaces that you're going to have to walk through that may not feel comfortable, but they will lead to a fuller understanding of your gifting and a fuller understanding of what it is God wants you to do.
Amen. I think that this was another good part that I'm now remembering about the conversation, was that we started talking about the dark spaces that were in the kingdom, that in God's kingdom there were still going to be these bad parts of the kingdom. Like, we had this fantastical idea that the kingdom will be perfect, when God clearly says that it won't be. Like, there will be false prophets, there will be false teachers and ideologues and people who try to pervert the gospel, and they will still exist within the kingdom, preaching and looking just like everyone else. And so you have to be able to discern that and still walk through that and figure it out. And so one of the things we talked about was that I think it was Sammy who said that 2 out of 7 of the churches that Paul writes to actually made it.
Right.
And so that was a very, very low
like
percentage.
29% or something like that.
A very low percentage that actually made it. And so that's something for us to consider, that yes, you are in the kingdom, but understand that the road of holiness, that the road to heaven is a thin one, that most people are probably not walking it the way that you think. And so you have to be willing to venture out and to continue to work in your calling, even though it may seem dark. Continue to share. We're going to keep going on with this conversation because there's a lot more things to dig into, and we have a limited amount of time. So one of the other things that we talked about, and this was just an eye-opening conversation, how often do churches represent their communities? Does this lend credence to the idea that the Sunday church hour is the most segregated time in America?
Yeah, so I thought, and I think it was Tyler we had a pre-conversation. I think it was Tyler from Tree of Life who brought up the idea that it's not always possible for a church to look different than the community. Like, so, for example, if you've got a church that's in a rural community, like, it's probably going to look like the folks that are there. But I think the idea of that question, when I wrote that question, the idea was, are we going out into our communities? A lot of us, and it may be true for you, I know I pass probably half a dozen churches on my way here on any given Sunday. And some of those are apostolic Pentecostal churches. Some of, they're a little bit of everything. So we were trying to explore, what is it that makes it where I'm going to go here instead of there. And I think people will, you feel comfortable with who you feel comfortable with. So there's that. But there's also, there's some historical legacies there. There's some things, some folks don't want to get down with other folks. It's a thing. So we really, it's not, I don't think it's something that we can necessarily answer in a day, because I think people who are far smarter than I have struggled with this as well. But I think that was the idea of the question was, you know, is it that we do this on purpose?
Mm.
Is it convenient? Is it comfortable? Should it be changed? How would you change it? You know, so I think that's kind of what we were kind of trying to get at with that question.
Yeah, I think that it's difficult when you're talking about communities and what a church should be specifically doing in their community, because you have to be aware of your community's needs
Right.
and what your community is asking for. And so if your church is not engaged with the community in that way, it's difficult to gauge any of those things. And so how can you do anything with it if you don't know those things? And so so how does a church then engage its community? What is the right way to do it? Do you go out and just start praying for people? Do you go door to door? Do you do a community event where you're giving out food? We've done that here. What is the way to communicate with people? And I think a lot of churches struggle with that, especially if they're in a diverse space. Like, what am I supposed to be doing with them?
Right. Yeah, and I think Laquita, during that conversation had mentioned that they did like a needs assessment for their community. So you try to figure out, do people need food assistance or do they just need transportation assistance to get to the food that they already have or that they already have access to? And so I think it kind of starts with a basic, like, let's see what you need and meet people where they are. Like, okay, let's find out what you need. I don't, until I ask you what you need or until you can tell me or articulate that need, I don't know what it is. I'm just guessing. So if I come in here and I got food baskets and y'all all live on farms, maybe that's not the best thing to do. But if it's, a low income area or what have you, then maybe that works. So it becomes a matter of, finding out what the need is so that you can meet it in that way.
And then I think we talked about this on the show before, the idea that churches have that if the people need something, they will come to the church. Mm-hmm. It's hard to understand how bad an idea that is. Yeah. Especially today. I think people are in a kind of delusion by the idea that the church is seen the same way it has always been. Right. Especially if you look at my generation, at least, the church does not have the positive glimmer that it used to for generations before. Right. It has a lot of some churches even considered a problematic thing. That's right. And so people don't feel safe the way that they used to when it comes to church. Church used to be the place that you went for everything. If you needed housing, if you needed food, if you needed money, if you needed whatever, you went to the church. But now, for this generation, the church is just seen as, what those people who believe in Jesus, that's where they go.
Yeah, I think so. You kind of hit on a couple things there, and there's a generational shift. I guess I'm either the tail end of your generation or the one before, based on all these grades up here. But I think there's a generational shift in what the church is and what it represents, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. So if you take it back, maybe my parents' generation. So the church was kind of the epicenter of life. And that's part of why when people get dressed to the nines and all that, because that was the one time that they could go and kind of show, look what God has done. There's a whole other conversation that kind of goes to that. But the church was that epicenter. And so this is where you saw people. This is where you could, we could come together and find out who had what, who needed what was going on. And now in kind of our modern day and age, it's like, a lot of the needs that church was meeting, church is no longer asked to meet. I don't need to go to church to see people. I can Facebook, I can Facebook. That's almost why you don't see class reunions anymore. I can Facebook. Mm-hmm. I can Instagram. I can see what's going on immediately. I don't need to know. I don't need to know who's selling a car, or who's got what, because I can go find those things in other places. And so now the church, it had wrapped itself up in those things, especially the Black church. It had wrapped itself up in those things.
Being that provider.
Yeah, this is me providing to you all the other social aspects that you need. A lot of times you'll hear some slightly older preachers say, it's not a country club. Church is not because that's essentially what it had functioned. Like that was kind of you get a membership. You think about why do you need a membership at a church? that's part of it, because
Yeah.
that's how you kind of get into it. And so now that those things are kind of pulled away, it becomes, what was the church supposed to do? And so now that's why it feels like, okay, for some folks, it's just church. It's just those people that believe, because it doesn't have those added benefits. It's like those people that believe in church, but they'll help you get a house. Like maybe back in the 50s, 60s, sure. But now I can do that on my own. So what does church have to offer for me now? And I think that becomes kind of the struggle that we find ourselves in today.
Yes, I think that the church finds itself trying to make other people see them as not a one-dimensional service, where we're not only just offering Jesus, like that is enough to just be offering Jesus to people, but letting people know that there is more. There is more that we can do for you, and we will give you Jesus. Like the most important thing is that we give you Jesus, but we can give you those other things as well. And so trying to break out of that has been a struggle, but I think as time goes on, each church figures out how they do that for their community specifically.
Right. Exactly.
So the next question, I think we'll close out on this one for time concerns and continue this, because we're going to have this conversation again and let it keep going. So we got into a conversation about politics, and the question was, have you ever been in an assembly church where there was conversation about day-to-day concerns?
Oh, I use the word quotidian. Sorry, that's just day-to-day. Sorry. It had to make sense to me. So yeah, with that, excuse my vocabulary.
It said finance, politics, etc. How do these things impact the life of a believer? Do they impact a life of a believer?
Yeah, so that question was basically asking, does your church talk about real stuff? You know, can you go to church and is there somebody there who will talk about finance, who will talk about, you know, how do you think about the environment? You know, does your church recycle? You know, and that seems like almost like a crazy question to ask, but you know, if you really think about it and kind of break it down, there are people where that's a concern. There are folks who, you know, that's something I'd like to see my church do. If I really believe that I'm a steward of the earth, it makes sense. But again, that's not, you know, I guarantee if you throw a rock and hit 8 churches, I'd be surprised if 4 of them, you know, had some sort of recycling program going on. So, but the thrust of that question was really, you know, do you talk about the day-to-day things that really concern your life in church? Like, yes, we talk about Jesus. Yes, and again, this is how to go. So yeah, like, yeah, I'm saved, but do I just hang on till God calls us home, or you know, I still got to pay rent on the 1st, or I still got to pay my car note on the 15th, or whatever. So, you know, how do we deal with that? You know, and so for me personally, like I've been to, I was telling the group during our kind of pre-conversation, like, so with my undergrad, I had to go, it was in cross-cultural management, cross-cultural relations. So part of that was I had to go and spend time in worship assemblies. So I had to go spend time in a mosque, I had to go spend time in cathedrals, spend time in different church assemblies, just to get a sense of how folks operate, how folks interact. And in some places, yeah, there's a real life conversation. Okay, this is what we do with money. This is how this is how God is looking at it. And in some places, there's conversation about the environment. There's conversations about, you know, this is how this impacts you. And, you know, there's some churches, I won't name them, where there's been conversation about politics, like you should vote like this because X, Y, and Z. And, you know, so those questions, what they're telling you in those spaces wasn't really the idea. The question was just, do we even talk about it? Like, forget if I'm giving you good advice or bad advice. Am I even talking about it? Because if it's bad, we can figure it out. But if we're not even talking about it, then how are you helping me to go and grow as a believer? Like I said, I love the Lord and I'm going to be here on Sunday, but I also got to pay rent Monday. So again, kind of working through, you know, does the church talk about that? Because I think that kind of helps us if we're going to expand and draw people in. Like, tell me something that's going to help my everyday life, you know. So that's kind of thought on that.
I think that the church could, what we just talked about, the church could make up for that by addressing those everyday life things. So if you want people to feel like you are more than just this one-dimensional religious center.
Right.
Bring that faith, bring Jesus into everyday
Right.
life.
Right.
Because he was in it.
Right.
He talked about it.
Right.
And so somehow the church has found a way, and we're using, I know we're speaking very generally, and I'm not saying that every church does this, but I see often a Jesus described that is very churchy, very hallelujah, he's revving up the organ, like he is taking it all home.
Right.
When he was out here,
right.
out in these streets.
Right.
He was with the worst of the worst,
right.
doing the work in the mud, getting his hands dirty, literally.
Right.
So people don't know about that Jesus, and so they think that their life events are too trivial to be compared to this all-powerful Jesus.
Right.
And so how does the church then not bring Jesus down and off its pedestal, but like help people to understand that his kingdom is in heaven and on earth?
Right. Yeah. And I think that kind of goes to, to a broader point of helping people to understand sort of the full picture of Jesus, and not just the stylized, idealized version, but the real, this is who the man was. This is who he was. This is how he existed. And I had a conversation with a friend, and there's a song out where the guy says, "Try Jesus, don't try me." Yeah. But if you think about it, like, Jesus was flipping tables in the temple, like, don't try Jesus, like, not like that, because he was winning.
About that action,
right? Exactly, like, and I think that's the thing that people lose sight of. It's like, we don't tell that full story. Like, this was a man. This was someone who was tempted as we are tempted and went through things we went through. So by giving people that sort of full picture, I think that will help to kind of bring people back and bring people in.
Yeah, I think even when it's interesting, even when we talk about like Jesus' crucifixion, it is talked about in a way that you feel like you can't relate to sometimes. Like the idea that he went through this pain, this excruciating pain, sometimes that isn't distilled into, like, when you're struggling with depression, when you're struggling with all these, or you're dealing with day after day of life, and it's just taking and bearing you down, this is you bearing your cross like he did. This is you doing something similar. He took this extreme punishment so that you could understand that this is what life is. This is what humanity is like, that you will bear and carry your cross. But you push on.
Yeah, and I think, using the example of the cross, that was a visceral, visual representation of the things that we will go through. And not that, it's not that I've ever experienced a crucifixion per se.
None of us.
But I feel like sometimes you got to say that sort of thing. But that, this is Jesus saying, look, I am going through something for you. So, and like he says, like, if you're going to follow me, pick up your cross. Like, so I'm not telling you to pick up a cross, and I ain't picked one up. Like, no, this is me literally picking one up, literally doing it. So you can do it figuratively. You can carry your cross. You can do that thing. You can bear whatever that thorn in your flesh is. Like, you can bear that thing because I did, and I'm with you. So not only am I telling you to do it, I did it, and not only am I telling you to do it, I'm going to go with you while you do it. So my grace will be sufficient for you. So I'll be there with you in that. So I think you're exactly right.
And I share this, get this out there, let people know about it. This has been a great conversation.
Amen.
I think the last thing I wanted to get into is that Jesus, the Bible is, because I had said this during the conversation with Go, that the Bible talks about political things, but in more of a descriptive sense. It does not clearly say that this is a conservative book, that this is a liberal book, because it's all over the place. You will find something to fit what you believe in there. So it is more descriptive about what politics is and how it functions rather than it is a directive. So I was explaining that it's hard to be a church and do politics in a way outside of informative. Because it's going to be difficult to use the Bible as a way to tell people what to do with it.
Right, and I think when you think about it, like there's so many different viewpoints that, like you said, that the Bible espouses. So it's not necessarily like you said, it's not a liberal book or a conservative book. Like it tells us, the widows and the poor you have what you always. So like, that means, what does that mean for taxes? What does that mean for, or render unto Caesar what is Caesar's? Like, so what does that mean for this thing? Or, and before you were formed in the womb, I knew thee. Like, so again, all those different viewpoints were like, well, I could argue this way, I could argue that way, but that's not what that's not what the Bible was trying to do. What it was kind of bringing us all the way back to that kingdom mindset was like, this is how you need to understand and think about the world. This is how you move through it. So understand these things and then move accordingly.
Yeah, the Bible talks about stand up against injustice, fight on behalf of the widow and the poor, and feed the hungry, give to the home, like do all these things as an individual.
Right.
It's not saying this is what the senators in Congress should do in Washington, D.C.
Right.
It's not going to tell you that.
Right.
Ever. It says nothing about that. But it gives you a moral foundation of like, this is what, if you are going to follow this book to what it says, here you go. This is what we believe. And then even then, there are still some things that you won't be able to refer to know what to do in each situation. Because the Bible doesn't necessarily tell you about whether you should vote for that levy for the roads. It doesn't necessarily tell you what you should vote for on public schools. Like it's not going to tell you that. And so that is where churches have to venture into the space of like, okay, let's use what God tells us to be mindful, to think before we act, to pray, and to seek his face before we do anything. So let's think about, why should we be voting for this or why not? What is this offering to us? What is this politician saying before we just go with one party or the other? Becoming more of a more well thought out, a more logic-based concept. I think that the church could open that door.
Yeah, I think throwing back to, I think Pastor had a series a couple weeks ago, we were saying, make America think holy. And it's that sort of idea, like just, look, it's not going to tell you, it's not going to give you the, hey, this is how you think about these social issues, this is how you think about the world at large. But what it will do is give you a framework to consider. And from there, it becomes, okay, this is how I move. And I think once we get to that space of, okay, how would God want me to think in this situation? How should I even be considering this situation? Then we can make decisions, then we can make choices and know that we're doing it the best way we know how, according to what we believe God is telling us, or according to what the Spirit is leading us to do.
And so I think with that, we'll end the conversation right there. And we could go on for a while, but we appreciate you all for tuning in. Share this with people out there, with your friends and your family. Let them know that there's good conversation happening here. I hope you're commenting, telling us what you like about it, what you think, what questions did you have while you were watching, and what do you want us to talk about in the future, and what do you want us to do? You can watch this on YouTube channel, Emanuel Broadcast. You can go to our Facebook page, the website, gat1150.org, and watch all these things there. I hope you all are doing well. We're praying for you as these COVID cases spike. Please keep yourself safe. Don't do anything crazy. We want to thank Minister Lee for joining us this evening and really just digging into this conversation with us. And go watch that on Conversation on Go's Facebook page and learn more about what this conversation was about. I think you'll really enjoy it. So God bless you. Thank you all for joining. Whose side are you on? I'm on the freedom side. God bless.